Welcome back, everyone, to the now slightly irregularly spaced Last Week's Movies, my podcast where I go take you along with me on my personal journey to find 1,000 movies I love 1 week at a time. And now it's getting a little more than a week. I mean, I'm still watching all the movies every week, and I'm still only talking about the movies I watched over the last week, but I really got to tighten up my schedule. Mostly just because I forget that I'm doing this podcast, mostly because I'm only doing it for my own fun, I guess. I don't know. Doesn't feel like I'm not fun doesn't seem quite right, but I'm doing this mostly for my own vanity, and as such, I forget to do it. However, I'm back to continue on to soldier forth. I'm putting in all the work of watching all this shit and thinking about it, so I might as well talk about it. And this week, I'm here to talk about A Quiet Place. The new movie just came out, written, directed, starring John Krasinski. Um, Sort of a pseudo sci-fi horror about a group of alien beings that are terrorizing Earth and have destroyed seemingly most of the population, and a family that is trying to survive under the knowledge that if they make any noise, these aliens are going to come out of nowhere and kill them instantly. So it's definitely a good movie to watch. I mean, it's a movie I would highly recommend. Just to get that out of the way, I would probably recommend it at a 4, maybe a 4.5, just because I've heard from other people too, people that don't like horror movies, that they enjoyed this because it felt like more of a speculative sci-fi movie than it did a horror movie to them. To me, I feel like it trades in a lot of horror tropes, but it also trades in a lot of sci-fi horror tropes. Things like Tremors and Alien especially come to mind, where the aliens have a very sort of alien, Ridley Scott movie shaped head. Not so much the same with the body, but kind of a similar feel to them as the aliens in Alien. And it's very much the Tremors like situation of make any noise, make any movement, and they'll suddenly appear and eat you. But it's not a fun movie. I would say personally for me, it's more of a 3.5. Maybe even a 3. It's not a movie I'm going to rewatch quickly, voluntarily. It's well acted, it's well written, it's very well filmed, but most of it's just kind of bleak, and it's suspenseful because of that. It's kind of it's not as bleak as The Road, maybe, but it's kind of on that similar path of like all humanity is dead and everything that you encounter is probably a threat, and that's the constant cloud over everyone's life. And it has, I'm not going to give anything away, but there's a sort of a tone shift at the end that kind of, to me, was like, really? Is that really I mean, it's kind of cool. It's going to be a crowd pleaser, but that isn't, I don't know. It as a very bleak movie, it would be a hard movie for me to just pick up and be like, I'm going to watch this movie a whole bunch. It's about all these people who are living in constant fear and randomly getting picked off and killed. Awesome. Um, but the aliens look cool. They look really cool, and the creature construction and idea is very fun. The actual plot itself is kind of totally unrealistic nonsense. There's no way for it to function as there's no way for the suspense to function in a realistic way in the universe he's set up. Just the idea that these aliens can come running from miles around when you make any noise at all louder than soft footsteps. These people are living for like over a year in that environment without coughing or waking up screaming in the middle of the night or snoring or farting or whatever. So it that falls down, but that's pretty easily disguised. Like, even knowing that and watching it knowing that, I I was pretty continually able to forget it the whole way through and just enjoy the movie for what it is. I think it's a really good, like I said, it's good speculative sci-fi in that way of like, yeah, okay, this is totally unrealistic, but I can easily lose myself in that, and it's still a fun movie to watch. So more recommended than enjoyed for me, but a pretty good movie. On the flip side of that, I also watched 1980's The Long Riders by Walter Hill, starring the Carradines, the Keaches, and the Quaids, uh, along with the guests. So all these sets of brothers: Randy Quaid, Dennis Quaid, Stacy Keach, James Keach, Robert Carradine, Keith Carradine, David Carradine, Christopher Guest of Spinal Tap, and his brother Nicholas Guest. And I'm a big Walt. This was the only movie I hadn't seen from the sort of glory days of Walter Hill's directorial career, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm a huge early Walter Hill fan. His run from 1975 to 1982, where he made was it 6 movies in that stretch, and all of them are good. And I would say, with the exception of Southern Comfort, personally, to other people it may be The Long Riders, all of them are great. They're Hard Times, The Driver, The Warriors, The Long Riders, Southern Comfort, and 48 Hours. Those movies are all well worth watching. And The Long Riders, it's, the Western story of Jesse James and the James gang. And it's just a lot of fun to watch. Felt very like there's some wooden acting in it. Not, James Keach is not the best actor as Jesse James, and there are other people in the movie, other parts that feel very stagey, some dialogue. Walter Hill, as a dialogue writer, he always had a hand in his script. Although I don't know, he doesn't. Yeah, he has an uncredited writing credential for this one. He always had a hand in his scripts. Not always the cleanest writer across the course of a movie, even as much as I love Hard Times or 48 Hours. Those movies have gaps in the dialogue where you're just like, that is such a wooden, weirdly delivered line. However, beyond that, cinematography in this movie is beautiful. And I love that he got all of these sets of brothers acting together as brothers in the movie. Like, there's a very sort of weirdly natural feel to it all, and a very good chemistry because of it, because all these people are related, because they all know each other, because they have those real family ties in a way that you just never see in most movies. And it's got a lot of great, really well done action in it. The shootouts and, the horseback stuff and all that, it's really beautifully done. Cinematography is beautifully done. And I think it's rare for a biography like this, or even for a movie about a whole factual period of the West. It's rare for something like that, given things like Tombstone or other similar, I guess, like, there's Gunfight at the OK Corral or things like that. My Darling Clementine. Things that are loosely based on fact tend to be really poorly constructed stories, because life doesn't work in clear narratives, obviously. We don't usually have big narrative arcs in our real lives. And so I thought the Long Riders, to that point, actually did a really pretty good job figuring out where to emphasize and maybe probably expand on and create a little extra or subtract a little extra around the movie to create a good sense of narrative around something that still felt like a very factual story. It may not have been at all, but that's not as important as the movie feeling true. And of course, the not to get too spoilery, but if you don't know that Jesse James got killed by Robert Ford, well, now you do. But the the death of Jesse James, the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is very like it's very clearly taken piece for piece from the stage play that was reenacted as like an old western attraction for people to come and watch the death of Jesse James, and they it was a production throughout like western sideshows or traveling shows and things like that. So they very clearly took that story, which I mean, and I think it was pretty clearly based on the true story of the time. But you know, you really get that at the end of the movie that kind of hits home with that narrative piece, and it was just a really it's a fun western. It's especially a fun western for me as I've had a lot of trouble. Somebody who really likes westerns, who really likes the 40s, 50s, especially 50s and 60s westerns. Um, it's really tough, and some of the new Hollywood 70s westerns, although there's not a lot of those that are really great, or the spaghetti westerns going into the 70s, but the prime of the spaghetti westerns is really the 60s. And there's not a lot after the 70s that's really that great. I mean, you get things like Silverado, Tombstone, The Quick and the Dead, you know, the 310 to Yuma remake, The Proposition, as a neo western or a western set in a whole different country, same sort of ideals and places of the West. It's hard to find westerns that were made after the 70s to me that are really like, oh, I could hang out and I can rewatch this movie. This has a fun feel of something that's not too corny, that's not too derivative, that doesn't just feel like a reflection of other better movies. And so The Long Riders was really kind of a nice standout on that point, something that feels very particularly of itself in the Western genre, made after the peak of the Western genre. So I enjoyed that a lot. I already bought a Blu-ray copy, and it's part of my core early Walter Hill collection. Also, I saw A Devil in a Blue Dress, the 1995 film noir starring Denzel Washington, directed by Carl Franklin, and also starring Tom Sizemore. This was kind of a left field pick for me. Franklin isn't a director I'm overly familiar with. Trying to think if I've well, I guess the other thing would be that one of the good reasons to have seen this movie is if you've seen One False Move. I own a copy of One False Move. In fact, I can actually, no, I loaned that to somebody. I don't have it on my shelf right now, but One False Move is one of my favorite neo noirs. Not, I mean, you could almost call it a neo western noir because it takes place generally in the South, and it's got something of a cowboy vibe to it, but very much a neo noir, 90s neo noir, starring Billy Bob Thornton and Bill Paxton, and just a great, grim, violent noir indie film. Absolutely fantastic. So, Devil in a Blue Dress, drawing on the same director and the same sort of sense of style, and starring Denzel Washington, which I was in one of his many Denzel Washington roles. Like if you're familiar with Denzel Washington as a angry uh, force for justice bent on revenge, then Devil in a Blue Dress is right in the Denzel Washington wheelhouse. And it's mostly just a very solid, nothing wrong with it movie. Um, it's just not a movie that also otherwise really stands out. Denzel Washington is good as he's always good. It's got Tom Sizemore in it, in another one of those. Oh yeah, that's right. Tom Sizemore's a good actor, and I like him when he's in stuff. And isn't he dead now? Oh, he's not. Weird, but yeah, Denzel. It's I want to like it more than I do because it's There's nothing wrong with the plot. The acting has some good and bad moments. Oh, it should be noted that Don Cheadle as Denzel's sort of ultra violent sidekick, Mouse Alexander, is fucking amazing in it, and he really should have had a bigger role. Every moment he's on screen is much better for it. But otherwise, a lot of what surrounds Denzel Washington in this movie is just it's very by the numbers film noir. It just feels like a somebody read every film noir they could and they took all the main tropes and they wrote them all down into a book and then they made the movie out of the book. And that's not bad, but it doesn't make it an especially fascinating movie to then go back and revisit a lot unless there's some particular part of it that you like or the novelty of a film noir led by and largely consisting of black actors and black characters, which is definitely a rarity and deserves its own place in film history just for that. And as a friend of mine was noting, it's really kind of a shame that we get all of these, you get all these Fast and the Furious movies, you get all of these huge movie franchises that go on and on and on, but we only get one Easy Rollins detective mystery. We only get, or I was thinking too of the, what was that pseudo Sherlock Holmes spinoff that they made in the late 90s. And I'm going to see if I can find this really quick. Probably not. No, I can't find it easily. But there's a 90s sort of pseudo Sherlock Holmes spin-off based off of Sherlock Holmes very clearly. And but as this like super oddball detective working in LA in the 90s and his sidekick that he ropes into working with him. And it's like a fun, quirky spin on modern Sherlock Holmes. And it's a cool movie, but you only get one of those. And if I could remember the name of it, that would be a lot more useful. But Devil in a Blue Dress feels kind of similar. It's like, oh, this could be the start of something cool. I would like to see more like it. This actual story itself isn't that interesting. I'd give it probably a 4-star recommendation just because I think anybody can watch it and enjoy it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And 3.5 for me is a personal enjoyment. After that, I saw Meet John Doe, starring Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck, a sort of political dramedy about a tramp who gets roped into a newspaper scam. This woman who's losing her job at a newspaper, played by Barbara Stanwyck, she decides to save her job by writing a fake letter pretending to be this guy who's decided he's going to commit suicide because of all the terrible ills in the world today and the fact that nobody pulls together and nobody talks to each other or works together anymore. And she succeeds in saving her job, but when people start to think that it might be a fraud, the newspaper decides, along with her, that they should find a guy to really be this fake letter writer and to have him pretend like he's going to commit suicide and go out and go on like a lecture circuit and write more letters and start this sort of underground political movement. That's Gary Cooper in this case, and a down as luck baseball player and all that. And it's a fascinating, if somewhat plotless, sort of political dramedy. A movie that doesn't really have any major narrative points up and down. It just kind of, partially it's a romance, partially it's a comedy, partially it's a politics movie. There's a lot of interesting characterization and a lot of interesting sort of examination of the morals of the time, and definitely some kind of good old-fashioned simplistic bullshitting about fine, high moral ideals and the idea of how politics should be and all that, which, makes you feel good, and then you think about it a little more in the movie, and you're like, "Wait a minute, this makes no fucking sense. What are they even talking about here?" But the end is also a little bit, I don't know. It doesn't really carry the weight you'd want to out of the movie for the journey that the main character goes on. Not a bad movie. Frank Capra, who's obviously, a one of the great classic Hollywood directors, making things like It's a Wonderful Life and It Happened One Night, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and all that. Lots of, great classic dramas and dramedies and comedies of the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and all the way back into the 20s. Um, I just I'd say it's a movie that it hits on a very specific time and a very specific ideology that doesn't, I mean, the political machinations of it are actually pretty cruel and translate pretty well in terms of how they treat this guy as he starts to become a bigger celebrity. But it kind of reminds me a lot of a more idealistic Face in the Crowd, which I would much more highly recommend by oh, I've talked about this recently. Starring Andy Griffith and directed by Elia Kazan, which is about Andy Griffith becoming this sort of down home spun political mover and shaker and voice of the people in a populist movement that eventually becomes highly corrupted. And this Meet John Doe kind of feels like a more idealized, more kid gloves version of that. So I don't know. Not a bad movie, but I would probably say a 3 for recommendability and maybe a 3 for me too, honestly. Just not a movie I would immediately jump back to. And after that, I watched The Hunger, 1983 movie by Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's brother. One of those directors that has done a lot more work and a lot more like big notable work than I really recognize him for doing. Things like Man on Fire, Spy Game, The Fan, Crimson Tide, True Romance, Last Boy Scout, Top Gun. I don't really have a great Tony Scott movie I love, and I was kind of hoping that The Hunger might be it. How can you really say no to a 1980s David Bowie vampire movie co-starring Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon? But the movie itself is much more of a really cool idea and not a good movie. It's about these two vampire lovers, one of whom is the principal vampire, and her lover, David Bowie, is the vampire she's created to be her companion. He's like a Victorian stable boy through flashbacks. And he's rapidly dying, and she's searching for a replacement. Awesome idea. But a lot, like, there are a lot of flashbacks, some of which work really well, some of which are Catherine Deneuve in brownface pretending to be an Egyptian queen. The actual sort of character constructions and arcs in the movie don't necessarily really make that much sense or fit together that well. There's a lot of very stylish directing where it feels like there's a lot of, it's kind of like a really, it's almost more of a music video than a movie. And it actually has, I can't remember the band that plays the music in it. Oh, it's Bauhaus. It does like the opening for as a band that they're there, like they're watching, and it just it doesn't it has about as much narrative continuity as a music video. It's got some beautiful, beautiful cinematography, some gorgeous moments, some great scenes, but it's a collection of great scenes and cool moments and beautiful cinematography, and the actual narrative stringing it together is just meh. There's nothing really to care about or connect with other than, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, and mixed with some other really dumb ideas. And I will give the movie credit for this. More than anything, they did an excellent job on David Bowie's old man makeup. Most aging makeup and turning a young actor into an old actor looks terrible. They did a really good job with David Bowie, making him look old. But that's kind of the highlight of the movie. That and like a closing shot with a balcony and like a cityscape that looks, super 80s purple, pink, black, and silver. That's really cool, but it's a very style over substance, ideas over actual writing and narrative construction kind of movie. I'd give it a 3 and recommend it about there too. The only other thing I watched was the 1965 French movie The Sucker, or Le Corniaud. I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced. My ability to pronounce anything in French is terrible. Directed by Gerard Ouray and starring Bourvil and other people. I don't actually really know what brought me to this movie. Um, Other than my interest in classic French cinema, especially 60s French cinema, which I kind of like Japanese cinema, I kind of feel like the 60s are really when I find a lot of French cinema most relatable. There's good stuff into the 70s, but budgets start tanking, and you start to feel like it starts to feel like a lot of the movies are being made on a much more of a shoestring. And in the 50s and 40s, there's certainly a lot of very good French movies. Not saying there aren't, but they also feel like more simplistic, classic, archetypal narrative tales of very black and white, good, bad kind of things. And it's not to denigrate any of the film technique or the acting or the writing or things like that. I have Rules of the Game, and I have Port of Shadows and things like that. There are certainly gems out there that I love from that era, but the 60s have a lot of the movies that I love most out of French cinema. And that's kind of what I was looking to see if I could. I'm always looking to find more. This is very much a classic French slapstick, the kind of movie that really hits home as to why the French are sort of, there's that whole thing with France being obsessed with Jerry Lewis. And you watch a movie like The Sucker, and it becomes readily apparent why. It's a very just obvious jokes, slapstick humor, funny, good, clever moments, but it also just didn't. It's about this guy who basically his car gets destroyed by this mobster looking to launder money through shipping a bunch of, or launder stolen jewels and gold and silver by sending it over to America. And he's got it all packed in his car, and so he crashes his car with this. He crashes this guy's car, and the guy was about to go on a trip to Italy. And so his mobster's like, "Here, take my car, get it on this boat, and I'll give you a free trip, and that'll take care of your car being damaged and all that, because I feel terrible about it." And so it's just a slapstick comedy movie about this guy taking this car full of gold and jewels down from France into Italy while being chased by all of these crime figures and police and whatnot. And it's fun and funny, but I kind of eventually just got really bored of it and lost interest in it. I might pick it up and finish it at some point, but not a movie that really hit the right notes for me. That kind of other than the jokes, it's just not. There are a lot of sort of montages with music and things like that I'm just like, this is just boring, and I don't care. So at the end of the day, The Long Riders is the only thing out of those 6 I walked away being like, oh, I gotta watch this again, and even buying a copy of. So not a great turn up for watching a bunch of movies this week, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at Zane Simon. Give me a like, thumbs up down there, that helps, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, MMA Nation. Oops, that's the other one. That's for my regular work. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Whatever. You're watching this on it. You know how it is. I'm not gonna tell you about it. Whatever. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I'll be back hopefully a little quicker next time, and with more movies.